Conference Finals are here. Sixers not in them, but apparently the Sixers can't stay out of the news. So we got a lot to get to with our guest here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. He is the author of the book Bubble Ball. A great insight. I finished the book. It is an amazing insight into not just the bubble of the NBA last year, but everything the NBA went through all of 2020. He is Ben Golliver from the Washington Post, and he joins us right now here on 97.3 ESPN. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. And before we get to anything else, I just want to let you know that I did finish the book. It was the audio book, and I was all good with your audio, so we're all good.
Great. I'm glad it got all squared away, and that's fantastic. I appreciate you checking it out, and I'm a little sorry for your Sixers. You know, we thought we might get a little bit of a different answer this year in terms of how their playoff fortunes would unfold compared to the bubble, and unfortunately, I think there was a lot of similarities between the 2 years, wasn't there?
There was, and I think that's a great point you bring up, and that leads me to my first question. I wasn't planning on asking you this first, but you mentioned there's some similarities there. For so long, people were screaming Brett Brown's the worst, right? And then they bring in Doc Rivers. He's won a championship. He's supposed to solve things, but he really didn't solve that much, Ben. It was, honestly, to me, comes down to the players. I think it proved that the players just weren't up to snuff. This just wasn't a good enough basketball team.
Well, I think that a couple things. You know, first of all, they wanted to import more shooting. They definitely got that from Steph Curry, but I think Danny Green being out was an underrated factor in Philly losing that series to Atlanta. I mean, that was a pretty close series. Philly should have won it. I mean, they were up big in multiple games, blew these leads. You know, a couple shots here and there from Danny Green. Maybe things are different, and that was part of their offseason strategy to get more shooting. They just did not have enough shooting when it mattered down the stretch, and certainly not enough to keep up with guys like Trae Young and Kevin Huerter. I think the other point to keep in mind, and I understand Ben Simmons is going to be the number one scapegoat everywhere. It has been for a week. I mean, you can't even log on the internet without people making jokes at his expense. I saw a lot of the same flaws in Joel Embiid that we saw last year in the playoffs. Now, of course, Simmons didn't play last year. This year, I mean, he pretty much didn't play in the fourth quarters. I mean, not even taking shots. So that's why I go back to Embiid as kind of a through line, because what we saw at the end of that Celtics series last year was a lot of fatigue, a lot of turnovers, poor decisions, and, you know, he would get his numbers, but maybe they wouldn't, you know, drive winning in the ways that you would hope. I saw a lot of the same thing against the Atlanta Hawks, frankly, and of course he's dealing with a meniscus injury, so that's going to be a complicating factor, but an awful lot of turnovers in Game 6 and Game 7 from Embiid. A lot of those turnovers going back the other way for dunks and layups where they're kind of momentum swinging plays. And then in the late game moments, you know, he wasn't the best player on the court. You know, other guys were taking over, including Trae Young for Atlanta, and he just wasn't able to dominate the action. And so he had an unbelievable season. You know, we had talked about a couple of months ago about his MVP chances and how he had really, you know, led a turnaround, at least during the regular season. But I thought it was a lot of the same struggles for Embiid once he got to the playoffs this year. They should have won that series. Had he played to his full capabilities, had he been healthy, I'm sure they would have.
Yeah, and you mentioned the turnovers. I mean, your superstar can't have 8 turnovers in a Game 7. I don't care how much in pain your knee is. You just can't make those turnovers. And it just felt like there were times in that game that the offense just went completely stale and could get nothing done. But with that being said, you mentioned, listen, Ben Simmons is the guy we're focusing on. And, you know, with Woj's latest report, you know, the Sixers and Rich Paul are talking. And I said at the beginning of the show, Ben, I understand no trade requests have been put in, but you don't talk about a breakup unless you're already thinking about it, right? You don't think about what is the future for us unless you're already thinking about what the future might not be together.
Look, I mean, I was at Game 7 in Philadelphia. I don't see any way Ben Simmons is back in a Sixers uniform next year. It just feels completely untenable. You know, the crowd is just on his back the entire second half, booing him multiple times. He's afraid to take the dunk when it's available to him late in that game. He doesn't want to go to the foul line. He doesn't really want to push the tempo because he doesn't want to get himself fouled in transition. I mean, he's always going to point to his defensive impact, and, you know, for sure, you know, he had some success in that series defensively, but You could sense Embiid's frustration with Simmons. You could sense Doc Rivers' frustration with Simmons. Both those guys threw him under the bus after Game 7. And look, when Dwight Howard's the only guy stepping up in the media to get your back, that's a big-time problem if you're Ben Simmons. I think it's better for everyone if they part ways, especially, for Simmons as well. He needs to get himself into a situation that's less pressure, less expectations, and more touches for him, where he has a larger offensive role so he can actually show what he can do well, as opposed to trying to fit in around other players. And for Philadelphia, they've just got to move forward. They've got to just admit, hey, look, we tried it. This is already 7 years in for Embiid. He's never made the conference finals. He's got persistent health injuries. You don't know how many more great years you're going to have from him because of that. Now is the time. You got to seize the day, move Simmons out, and start on the future.
Ben Golliver joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, at Ben Golliver on Twitter, and Ben.Golliver on Instagram for all of your NBA coverage. The book is Bubble Ball. Also check out his work over for the Washington Post. You mentioned you were at the Sixers game, and I got to ask you, before we get to anything else, with Bubble Ball, you talked about how different things were for the world and everything back in 2020. How has the traveling been for you? Now that you are traveling around covering the league, because in Bubble Ball, if anybody reads it, you give it very intimate details about what it was like for you and other people getting to the bubble, in the bubble, leaving the bubble, and for a lot of people reading the book, that it's like a different world what you guys went through.
Oh, for sure. Well, it's great to be back to normal. I love being in arenas where you have the crowds really amped up and super excited. I'm in Milwaukee right now, and their crowd was pretty into it in Game 1 until, Trae Young kind of shut them up a little bit down the stretch. But, same thing in Brooklyn, same thing in L.A., same thing in Philly. All these arenas I've been to have had great crowds, great noise, great atmosphere, and it's just, a better viewing experience. Basketball is a public game, right? This is supposed to be something where 15, 20,000 people are all getting excited at the same highlights and getting frustrated with the same bad calls and everything else. And so, the bubble was really eerie as it was happening. I mean, it was an amazing experience. It felt like a private show where, we're almost in like the opera house, and the opera house is empty, and we're getting like a personalized performance. But, it's so much better to have the fans. And, from the travel perspective, it's interesting. I think a lot of business travel is actually still down around the country. A lot of people are doing the work from home. A lot of people are doing the virtual meetings. And so, a lot of these hotels I'm going to, or the downtown areas of these cities, they're pretty empty. They're pretty quiet. And that wasn't necessarily something that I was expecting, because obviously, in a lot of places, the COVID rules have started to lift and you can kind of get back to your normal life. But I don't think the business travel industry has completely come back. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha. Again, the book is Bubble Ball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save a Season. I highly recommend it, by Ben Golliver. Ben, back to the Sixers rule here. I was wondering the other day, to me, I look at Daryl Morey's history. This guy has never been someone to sit on his hands. He's never been a complacent individual. He's never been somebody who's been satisfied, right? So to me, I'm assuming that we're going to see some interesting moves by the Sixers this offseason. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Simmons is going to be traded. I think that's going to be the big move of this offseason. I think a guy like Tobias, his contract is so big, it's really going to be hard to trade him for added value. And I think the other pieces around the edges, from there, they don't have a ton of great assets to go out and make some big moves. But I think that they're going to want to get more shooting. And I think if you can accomplish that in the Simmons trade, you're certainly going to try to do that. And then you're probably going to have to be in a situation where, because you're trading Simmons, there's more defensive pressure on Embiid. So, guys like, Danny Green are going to become important, going forward. But to me, I think that this is the summer where the Band-Aid gets ripped off, right? Where you can no longer pretend it's Joel and Ben and they're going to be a title pairing. I think that's what's happening this summer, and everything else is going to be small potatoes compared to that.
Now, you mentioned that you were over there in Milwaukee. Game 1 was the Trae Young game in many ways, but it also felt like a game where it felt like the last series. Giannis goes out there and does his thing, but his teammates came up short. Chris Middleton had a horrible game last night. It seems like with Milwaukee, for as great and as impressive Giannis is, his teammates have to show up in order for them to win games. He can't win games by himself at this point.
Yeah, and they're not designed that way. They're designed to be a unit on both ends, offensive and defense. I mean, they stick very tightly to their systems. They always want to have balanced scoring. They want to keep the ball moving. They want to get out in transition, and then defensively, they like to have Giannis as a help defender, right? It's not all about just him going out there and shutting down the other team's star. They always want to have that team approach, and that's Coach Bud. He's bringing that from the San Antonio Spurs, and a lot of times the executives here with the Bucks will try to compare Giannis to Tim Duncan in terms of how he's an unselfish leader and kind of part of a balanced attack. You're absolutely right. They needed more from Middleton. They actually got a great game from Drew Holiday offensively, but I thought defensively he was really struggling to stick with Trae Young, and so were some of their other defensive pieces. So I think that's really where they're going to have to start the adjustments for game two. They have to decide, should they go small more? Brook Lopez was just getting absolutely torched by Trae Young on the floaters. And they're also going to have to decide, offensively, how do they get their shooters on track? Guys like Bryn Forbes, Pat Connaughton, those guys are really important. They've had some moments in this postseason run so far. They've got to get the three-point shooting going because they were really, really bad from beyond the arc. And some of that comes back to Middleton, too. He takes a lot of threes. He's got to make some of them.
Now, you mentioned, maybe they need to go small. Is that a situation where, let's say the Bucks decide to take, I don't know, Lopez out of the lineup? Like, is that a situation where maybe you throw Portis in there for shooting? Do you put Connaughton back in the starting lineup? What do you think the Bucks should do then for game two?
Well, personally, I would ditch Lopez pretty much entirely. I would have Giannis as my starting center, and I would use Bobby Portis off the bench, a little bit heavier doses. Now, he struggled defensively too, but I just think Lopez, it's such a tough spot for him. He's just so big and so slow. I think the way Milwaukee's going to play it, though, they always like to double down. They don't really like to adjust that much. I think what they're going to do is they're going to say, look, Lopez played terribly on offense and pretty bad on defense. They're probably going to say the law of averages says he's going to play better offensively, and Trae's going to come back to earth a little bit in game two. If that happens, we can stay big and still kind of skate by and play the way we like to play. I think the most important thing is, though, in the fourth quarter, we saw in game one, Milwaukee's going to go to that smaller lineup. They're going to have Giannis as the center, and then they're really going to have to do a better job rebounding as a team defensively. I think guys like Clint Capella and John Collins really did a nice job of putting pressure on the offensive glass for Atlanta late in that game. And so that's what the trick is for Milwaukee. If they take Lopez off, they've got to get better rebounding from their guards, and it puts a lot of pressure on Giannis to kind of hold down the paint all by himself.
Now, I got to know, because I feel like I've been wondering this, and I feel like most people can't give me a good answer when I keep asking this question, but why is Nate McMillan still the interim coach of the Hawks?
Well, it'd be strange to do it right now in the middle of the playoffs. I mean, I think that it's just a done deal. He's going to get a new contract this summer. I mean, it's amazing to think. As far as I know, this is like the deepest he's gone in the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, as a coach or player since the 1996 finals when he was with the Seattle Supersonics. So, I mean, this is like a dream run for Nate McMillan. He's done a great job of, connecting with Trae Young, getting him to buy into the team concept and to move the basketball, not just shoot the basketball. And the personality fit there has been excellent. Nate's really had to reinvent himself. When he was back, with the Portland Trailblazers as their coach, when I was first coming up as a writer, he liked to call himself, or he was called a lot Sarge. He was like a sergeant out there. He's like a drill sergeant. And he's become a much more kind of laid-back guy. Now, look, he still demands a lot on the defensive end from his teams, but, he's really opened up his mind and his philosophies about how to make things work with a small guard like Trae Young, who loves to shoot the basketball from deep. And he's given Trae a lot of berth, a lot of freedom to play the way he wants to play, and it's really paid off for the Hawks. So have no fear. He's going to get a nice raise and a long-term contract this summer.
Ben Golliver joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, at Ben Golliver on Twitter, at Ben.Golliver on Instagram, Washington Post national NBA writer, also author of the new book, Bubble Ball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save a Season. Ben, I want to flip it out west here for a moment. Another young superstar that's been incredibly impressive is Devin Booker. I know we're talking about him, but how about DeAndre Ayton? I mean, this guy, I don't think has gotten talked about enough because everyone loves Booker and all the Kobe comparisons, which I think are a little bit hyperbole just for me. But DeAndre Ayton has been a special, special player. And I got to say, without him, I don't know if the Suns are here right now.
Well, first things first, the Kobe comparisons are ludicrous. I mean, I understand people want to do that, but, some of these players, I like to call them non-comparable. You can't compare any current players to some of these legends. I mean, Kobe already had a three-peat at this point of his career, age-wise compared to Booker, and
Right.
Booker didn't make the playoffs for the first 5 years of his career. So give me a break. I mean, there's no comparison there. I know they both love the mid-range. I know they both got great technique on the shot. But, that kind of stuff drives me crazy. Now, in terms of DeAndre Ayton, he's really grown up a lot in the last 6 months. I give Chris Paul a lot of the credit for helping steer Ayton in the right direction. I give Monty Williams a lot of credit for understanding what Ayton does well and crafting a role for him. This is a guy who's not a great passer. He's not great outside of the mid-range as a shooter. You really don't want him handling the ball all that much if you can help it. But he's a great finisher. He can play very well in the pick and roll. He's very agile. He moves well on defense, and he can protect the rim. Those are all very helpful skills right now. And you saw it on that game-winning lob play, just a complete mismatch against Zubac. I mean, Zubac's barely able to get off the court. Ayton's flying over the top of him to make a very athletic catch and finish. And it was a great pass, of course. It was also a great screen by Booker to free up DeAndre Ayton. But Ayton did his part on the lob finish, and there aren't a ton of centers in the league, I think, who could have finished that play quite as well as he did. And, to me, I didn't know which way Ayton's career was going to go. I mean, when he comes out of the gate with that drug suspension, you're wondering, is this guy even serious about basketball? Is he here for the right reasons? Is he devoted to the sport? And that's why I use that phrase matured or maturity or growing up a lot this year, because he has been a huge part and very consistent against all sorts of different matchups. He was great against, Anthony Davis and the Lakers. He held up his end of the bargain there. He really punished the Lakers centers. Guys like Marcus Gasol and Drummond struggled to stay with him athletically. And then in the second round, he did a very nice job defensively making Nikola Jokic work. And then his athleticism really showed through in that series too. So it's been, if not an A+, at least a solid A playoffs for DeAndre Ayton, and I didn't really see that coming.
Can the Clippers get back in this series without Kawhi, or should we just pencil the Suns into the NBA Finals?
Look, I just don't see it. I understand that they were pretty close in Game 2. That was kind of a back-breaking defeat for the Clippers in that one. I feel like if they were going to have a chance in this series, they needed to take that one. Kawhi has been very, very important for them. They've played well, all things considered, without him, but they keep getting themselves in these 2-0 series holes, and that's playing with fire, and eventually you're going to get burned. And I think, Chris Paul coming back for Phoenix just gives them an even bigger advantage, and I think they're going to take this thing home pretty quickly.
Ben Golliver joining us here on Game Day on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, you can hear Game 2 of the Hawks and Bucks tomorrow on 97.3 ESPN. Suns, Clippers tonight right here on 97.3 ESPN. Ben, you mentioned you cut your teeth over there in Portland with the NBA, your coverage, and I got to ask you about this opening. Indiana brought back Rick Carlisle. Udoka's finally getting his opportunity in Boston, which I'm very happy about. I got to tell you, though, I keep seeing Mike D'Antoni's name swirling around Portland, and I'm losing my mind. I don't understand who thinks Mike D'Antoni being hired by Portland is a good idea. And if they do think it's a good idea, I question their basketball acumen. I don't understand why does Portland think Mike D'Antoni with his resume is going to get them further than Terry Stotts?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be D'Antoni personally. I think it's going to be Chauncey Billups.
I hope so.
Neil O'Shea and Chauncey Billups have had a pretty long-standing mutual respect type of relationship going back to their days with the Clippers. I mean, Neil O'Shea just sings Chauncey Billups' praises just nonstop. And so, to me, I think one thing to point out, and we saw it with the Ime Udoka hire with the Boston Celtics, the players have made a lot of noise collectively over the last 12 months about increasing representation among black coaches and black front office executives. And I think, that's just been something that a lot of the players really feel passionately about. We heard from Damian Lillard list, his desired candidates. And it was Jason Kidd and Chauncey Billups. And, I think that some of these organizations are really going to have to take a hard look at that and say, all right, well, do we want to, are our values aligning with what our players are asking for, essentially? And I think that that's another thing that could play to Chauncey Billups' benefit. He's obviously very well respected, well regarded. He's a former point guard like Lillard, and he's a great communicator and a really friendly guy. And I think all those kinds of things help. From Portland's standpoint, it would be a little bit of a risk because he's inexperienced, and you're replacing a guy with Terry Stotts, who had a long track record of success there. But if you're a first-time coach, you would love to inherit a roster that's got Damian Lillard, an all-NBA perennial selection, plus a bunch of other pieces who have been there for a while and have proven that they can win at, a pretty high level, not a championship level, but a pretty high level. So to me, that's where I expect them to go. If they can't get Chauncey Billups as their coach, something will have gone wrong, in my opinion.
I really hope so, Ben, because I have retread fatigue. I'm tired of the Stan Van Gundy's and the Mike D'Antoni's constantly getting all these third, fourth, fifth, sixth opportunities when you see other guys not even getting opportunities at all. Like, what is Becky Hammond going to do? Have to wait till Popovich decides to go to the retirement home before she gets a shot in San Antonio? Like, I don't understand why this league is so obsessed at times with running back to the name brands who haven't done anything.
Well, look, I mean, it's always easier to sell experience than to sell, potential, right? I think when you're in those interviews, like a guy like Rick Carlisle is a great example. He gets hired by Indiana, and he can say, I've carried a team to the title, or I've coached a team to a title. I've been in the playoffs year after year. I understand how to build a winning culture that consistently gets to the postseason. And that's what Indiana is looking for. And we saw last year they tried to go young with Nate Bjorkgren, and it blew up in their face. So, it's a real balance. But I do think because of the finances involved, you're going to see a number of first-time head coaches this year. If you have to pay a coach like Rick Carlisle $7 or $8 million a year, I mean, not every ownership group is going to want to do that. And then that's why they're going to take some chances on some younger first-time guys. And so I think there was a total of like 7 or 8 openings before some of these recent hirings. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see a couple more first-timers hop into that mix.
Ben Golliver has joined us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. The new book is Bubble Ball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save a Season. At Ben Golliver on Twitter, at Ben.Golliver on Instagram, Washington Post NBA writer. And as all guests, he appeared here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Ben, appreciate your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. Take care.